Welcome to the video. Today we'll examine when spending 50% of your take-home pay on rent can be acceptable, and when it becomes a serious financial mistake. We will move from conventional rules to real-life budgets, decision frameworks, and practical compromises, and we'll close with quizzes to test understanding. Let's start with a relatable moment. The dream apartment that forces you to spend half of your take-home pay on rent. We will quickly explore whether this is a smart move or a financial trap by looking at your income, savings, and real-world commitments. Here's our agenda. First, we'll revisit the 30% rule and why it exists. Next, we'll break down the core risks of spending half your income on rent. Then, we'll define the circumstances where high rent can work. After that, we'll run a stress test you can apply before signing a lease. We will also cover practical alternatives. Finally, we'll reinforce key ideas with quick quizzes. The 30% rule is a historical guideline and not a rigid mandate. Since housing and income vary across locations and professions, applying it blindly can be misleading. Use the rule as a starting point to frame your budget. The more precise question is whether your budget leaves room for adequate emergency savings and ongoing investments after paying rent and other essentials. Before we go further, a quick disclaimer. This video is for educational purposes only and does not constitute financial, legal, or tax advice. Everyone's situation is different, so consider consulting a qualified fiduciary advisor to tailor these concepts to your needs. Here's the core danger. If you depend on general frugality and maintain only small savings, committing half of your take-home pay to rent is risky. A robust emergency fund, typically 3 to 6 months of expenses, is non-negotiable. Consistent investing, ideally 15 to 25% of your income, is what builds long-term security. If half your income is immediately consumed by housing, one job loss or major expense can quickly trigger debt. Use this decision flow. First, ask whether your net income is genuinely high. Second, determine whether the remaining 50% still covers other needs and allows you to contribute 15 to 25% to investments. Third, confirm you already have a 3 to 6 month emergency fund. Finally, stress test the scenario against a job loss or rent increase before committing. Here are the steps for a pre-lease stress test. First, track the last 12 months of actual expenses. Do not guess. Second, draft a mandatory budget that includes rent, utilities, insurance, transportation, food, healthcare, debt, and savings. Third, set savings as a non-negotiable line item at a target of 15 to 25% rather than treating it as leftovers. Fourth, test shocks such as a 2 to 3 month job loss, a 10% rent increase, or a $2,000 unexpected bill. If any shock breaks the plan, the housing is unaffordable, and you should choose a cheaper option. Let's analyze 3 scenarios. At $3,000 net income, half on rent leaves $1,500 for everything else and a $600 savings target. That is typically not feasible. At $5,000, the leftover is $2,500 with a $1,000 savings goal. This might work only if your emergency fund is already in place and the remaining needs fit. At $12,000, $6,000 remains after rent, and a 20% savings rate of $2,400 is still achievable, leaving meaningful room for essentials and lifestyle. Comparing 50% rent to 30% rent, the high rent path can deliver a dream location, amenities, shorter commutes, and proximity to career opportunities. However, it often creates fragile cash flow, a small margin for error, slower wealth building, and higher stress. The 30% approach enables a stronger savings rate, faster emergency fund accumulation, flexibility, and lower stress, but comes with trade-offs such as longer commutes, fewer amenities, and compromises on space. This sequence illustrates paycheck allocation. First, rent is considered, then essentials, savings and investing, and finally discretionary spending. The key is to prioritize savings alongside essentials. If your contributions fall below roughly 15% or your emergency fund is inadequate, that is a red flag. Sustainable cash flow is more important than short-term lifestyle upgrades. This pie shows a typical high rent allocation. Housing consumes half of take-home pay. That often compresses discretionary spending to about 10% and risks pushing savings below a healthy threshold. Confirm that healthcare, transportation, and insurance still fit before proceeding. This plan organizes a 6-month sprint to build an emergency fund. Begin with a budget audit and cancel unused subscriptions. Set up automated transfers on payday. Maintain consistent monthly contributions. And accelerate progress using any windfalls or temporary increases from negotiation or side work. Here is a concise checklist of non-negotiables. Ensure your savings rate is at least 15 to 25% after accounting for rent and essentials. Confirm that your emergency fund covers 3 to 6 months of expenses. Make sure you have appropriate insurance. Verify that your plan passes stress tests for job loss, rent increases, and unexpected expenses. Finally, clarify trade-offs around commute, laundry, space, and lifestyle to avoid disappointment. Protect flexibility by compromising intelligently. Consider neighborhoods with strong transit connections. Use shared laundry or a portable washer to avoid paying a premium for in-unit amenities. Negotiate rent or seek concessions. Reduce net housing costs by house hacking or adding a roommate. Finally, delay the higher-end unit until your emergency fund and savings rate are secure. Quiz time. Which factor is the best indicator that spending 50% of your income on rent might be sustainable? Option A says you love the neighborhood and it shortens your commute. Option B says your remaining 50% easily covers essentials and lets you save 15 to 25% with a 3 to 6 month emergency fund already in place. Option C says you promise to cut back on dining out and hope it works. Option D highlights amenities like in-unit laundry and a pool. You may pause the video now to think about the answer. We will discuss the answer in the next section of the video. The correct answer is the option that confirms your remaining 50% covers essentials and allows savings of 15 to 25% while maintaining a 3 to 6 month emergency fund. Amenities and intentions are not reliable safeguards. A solid savings rate and an existing buffer are the real indicators of sustainability. Second quiz. Your take-home pay is $5,000. Rent at 50% is $2,500. You require $1,400 for other essentials. Can you still hit a 20% savings goal? Option A says yes. You can save $1,000 and still have $100 left for wants. Option B says no. You can only save $700 after essentials. Option C says yes, but only if you skip insurance. Option D says it is impossible to tell without taxes. You may pause the video now to think about the answer. We will discuss the answer in the next section of the video. The correct answer is that you can save $1,000 and still have $100 remaining for discretionary spending. The math is 5,000 minus 2,500 minus 1,400 equals 1,100 left. A 20% savings goal is 1,000, so 100 remains. This diagram depicts a decision tree for evaluating whether 50% rent is acceptable. It starts with the consideration, checks whether net income is high enough, verifies that the remaining income covers essentials while maintaining a savings rate of 15 to 25%, confirms that an emergency fund of 3 to 6 months exists, and then applies a stress test for job loss and rent increases. Depending on the results, the outcomes are to stop as unaffordable, build the emergency fund first, or proceed cautiously. Here are the key takeaways. Percentage rules are context rather than mandates. Spending half your income on rent is risky unless your savings rate and emergency fund are already strong. Always stress test before signing and automate savings. Compromise on amenities or location to preserve flexibility. Target consistent investing of 15 to 25% of your income to build long-term security. To wrap up, track a full year of expenses and build a mandatory budget. Require both a 3 to 6 month emergency fund and a savings rate between 15 and 25%. If reasonable shocks break your plan, the rent is too high, and you should select a cheaper option. Remember, smart compromises are better than short-term amenity satisfaction that jeopardizes long-term stability. Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, please like the video, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more content on smart money decisions. I'd love to hear about the trade-offs you have made for housing, so share your story in the comments.